Well, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and start tonight. Thank you for coming to our town hall tonight. We're going to have two discussions tonight. At 6:30, we're starting with a school bond discussion. And then at 7:30, we're going to start with candidates night, where you can meet all of our candidates for city council. My name is Scott Lewis. I'm here on behalf of Midway Boosters. I'm a former booster, and they've asked me to host tonight's event. Also assisting are my wife, Krista, and also Joe and Jody Kladovich, who are right here. And Joe and Jody are with Boosters. Also joining us tonight, I just want to recognize Craig Simon, our president of the Boosters. Craig, thanks for sponsoring this tonight. And also Mayor Johnson is joining us by live stream somewhere out there. So wave to the mayor. So if you have friends who can't be with you tonight, go ahead and let them know. You can send a text that they can tune into the Midway City Facebook page, and there's a live stream of tonight's events. So if they want to join there, they're welcome. So we're eager to introduce you to our candidates tonight. That's my bell. It's my one piece of hardware I didn't have for this event, so we had to find a bell. Our first discussion is going to be, like I said, it's going to be about the school bond. And when we were planning our school bond discussion, we had a few goals. First of all, we didn't want to duplicate what had already been done. There's been 4 or 5 kind of meet and greets and Q&As that have been hosted by the school district, and those are fantastic, and we're really happy that they're doing those. We wanted to do something that was supplemental to that and different than that. The second thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to enlist parents of Midway school students so that they could advocate for their kids, because they're probably the best advocates out there for what's best for their kids' education. And the third thing that we wanted to do is we wanted to show Midway and the Greater Valley that we can have really thoughtful, fruitful conversations without name calling and without blood pressure rising, and just have a really good dialogue, and at the end of it still be friends and neighbors. And we want more of that in our community. So as you came in tonight, we passed out some cards, and those cards on one side, it has kind of the decorum for tonight's event. And so we'd ask you to take a look at those. Just in general, just be nice, and know we'd like you just to refrain from any kind of outburst or cheering or booing or jeering or anything like that. There will be opportunities to show your appreciation and applaud for candidates, and also for our parents at the end of the session. On the back of that card, there's a space where you can write down your questions. So if you have any questions that you would like to pose to these two or later to the city council candidates, then just write down a question on the back of that card. We encourage you to just put one question per card. If you need more cards, we have plenty of cards. So just ask us for another card.
Hold it up and I'll come get it.
Yeah, you can pass them to Krista. She'll come around and get those from you. Okay. Also, we want to get to as many questions as we can in the time allotted. So we do have a timer for our guests, so they can kind of keep an eye on the clock. And so let me go ahead and introduce you to our two guests tonight. Start with Chris on the left here. Chris has been a resident of Midway for 5 years. He is married to Liz Crittenden, and they have Chris Crittenden. They have 4 kids, 2 of which are currently attending Midway Elementary. Early in his career, Chris worked on education reform for a large national consulting firm, or international probably, in Washington, D.C. He has been keenly interested in education ever since. He's now a small business owner as well as a professor at BYU. You don't have enough gray hair to be a professor at BYU. I could be a professor at BYU, except I couldn't. So thank you, Chris, for coming. Brad, this is Brad Wagstaff. Brad moved to the Heber Valley at the age of 3 and has been in Heber Valley for 40 years. And he and his wife are both from here. And in fact, he told me that his wife's great-grandpa was the first sheriff in Midway. So hopefully we won't need a sheriff today. Together I have 5 kids ages 9 to 22, and they've all gone to Wasatch schools. And at one time they had 5 kids in 5 different schools. Is that correct?
That's correct. From preschool, Yeah, from preschool all the way, we had the intermediate school at the time, and then we'd run kids, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're going to 5 different schools.
Wow. Okay, I think you win an award for that. Brad did his undergrad at BYU and then got an MBA from Wharton. Professionally, he was with Intel Venture Capital and moved on to real estate in 2005, and then started up his own company, Mobile Capital, in 2008. And they do real estate investments primarily in the hospitality industry, and currently manages a $350 million hospitality portfolio, mostly at Marriott and Hilton hotels. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. And he also owns a small business that many of us have probably used over at Deer Creek here in the Heber Valley. So to lead off, Brad, why don't we let you go ahead first? And we're going to give Brad the floor for 5 or 10 minutes and let him kind of run through his position on the school bond and why he's here tonight.
Yeah, thank you. You guys can hear me? Anyway, I just want to say thanks for the boosters. I think this is a great format. I got to say, when Scott first called me, I'm like, oh my word, what am I getting myself into? And then, to be honest, when I heard that Chris was voicing sort of a different opinion, I thought this will actually be really good. I'm actually really happy that Chris and I are here to talk about this, because I think it's an important issue for our community, and it's something that I think there's differing opinions and differing perspectives. And I think Chris and I actually share a lot of similar opinions on the value of education and the value of building, great communities. And so I think that there's a lot more that we're probably on the same page.
But we'll pretend to be on the opposite side.
Yeah, but I think it's a really good dialogue. So thanks, Scott, for putting this together, and Chris for voicing it differing opinions. So my position is to vote yes on the school bond. We can scroll through. This is actually, we've covered this, so we'll skip to the next one. So my history is really, my family moved here 40 years ago, and I grew up through the Wasatch County School District. I went to J.R. Smith Elementary growing up. It was actually the first class at J.R. Smith, so that is how old I am. And then went through Wasatch High School. And I think a lot, Chris and I spoke a little bit before this, and I think a lot of my perspective is just growing up in a small community and growing up in a small school, and the educational and opportunities that we have to do that in smaller school formats. And so I think that drives a lot of my perspective, to be honest, as we talk about what's the right way to build schools and to grow in our community. We mentioned my children, they've all gone through Wasatch County School District, and really I feel like the school district has, and opportunities that I had growing up, has really shaped who I am and really shaped my leadership approach, has really shaped my educational thoughts, has shaped a lot of who I am today. It's taught me to work hard. It's taught me to do things that I learned in Wasatch School District. And I really appreciate the school district and what you've done, and want to continue to give back to the school. And I really am a big believer in the learn, earn, and return motto that Wasatch County has put out there. And I'm seeing a lot of people my age who grew up here, who have come back and really have a desire to give back to the community. Next page. So why are we here? To be honest, when I got my tax bill and showed the incremental cost that was going to be on my taxes, my first thought was, well, why am I paying for that? I'd love to be having the discussion of, how do we shift that burden onto new home builders or developers? And to be honest, I've seen that model work in California, and I participate in that as a developer in California. And really what I've learned over the past couple of months is that Utah law really requires us, the only way to build educational facilities is to do it through the use of a bond. And that's really why we're here. If we want to build new facilities, we have to bond them. We don't have any other path to do it. And so my choice is to vote to spend the money to build more facilities. Next slide. So let's talk about the numbers. So there is a lot of information out there of what is going to happen to Wasatch County over the next 10 years. And in my lifetime, I've seen massive growth come into this valley. And to be honest, I love it. I love the people who are coming in, people that come in and bring great perspectives and great experiences that they brought to the valley. And some of my favorite, a lot of my favorite people that I hang out with, none of them really grew up here. And I love the people that grew up here too. But I think it's a great thing. But the reality is we're going to continue to grow. There's 10,000 homes slated to come into the county in the next 10 years. That results in about 5,000 students that are going to come in. And I just don't see another option that we have in front of us that suffices our long-term growth in the valley other than building more facilities. And so, when Wasatch High School was built, it was built for 1,800 students. It opened with 1,300 students. It's now approaching 2,400. And it's been an 85% growth rate over the last 10 years. And as I look at how that growth rate continues, my perspective is we've got to invest in education, and we've got to do it now. We'll get into kind of the why we need to do it now from my perspective, but I think we've had a luxury of being able to use the old middle school, which is the West High School, that's allowed us to sort of get by now, but we're reaching capacity on that facility. We're really a lot of our public spaces in the high school. I mean, I've watched this growth happen, and it's phenomenal to walk in to these schools and walk into the common area and see how many students are in there. It's really phenomenal how many people are in that high school. And same with Midway Elementary. I've had all of my kids go through Midway Elementary. I've spent a lot of time with the teachers in Midway Elementary, and we're really at capacity. We don't have room to grow, and I believe we need to make the investment to move forward. Next slide. So let's talk about school size. And this is probably one area that I think a lot of stuff Chris and I agree on. The school size and how we continue to grow is probably one area that I think you'll see is, I love to see the growth model that utilizes that 1,500 to 1,800 student model. I think the size of the current high school is about as big as I'd like to see. And I'd love to see that model keep going at that 1,500 size school. And really, I think that size school really balances the economies of scale with student opportunities the best from what I've seen. And it's also a model that we're seeing Cache County and Washington County use to grow as they go through the process of going from a single high school to 2 to 3 to potentially 4 high schools. And the question is how do we want to grow? I think the growth is going to happen, and how do we want to grow and what size school? So I'm a big proponent, and I really like what the school districts proposed and done. Next slide. The location, I really like the location. The location is actually right in between where the growth is happening. And so I think the location's right. I think it's the right decision versus taking the Sorensen land and spending $6 million to excavate it and level it so it's usable. I think it's the right decision to put it in this location. I think the construction costs are the right cost. And there's been concern about a flood zone. I don't think that's a legitimate concern. I think that the location is the right location. Next slide. This is just my perspective on land costs. And 2 minutes? Okay, I'll go fast. I don't think land is getting any cheaper. I don't think construction costs are getting any cheaper. And my experience is as I've done development over the last 7 years, specifically in the hospitality space, I mean, I've seen the cost per key, which is really how we measure cost in the hotel space, go from $125,000 a key, which is about $150 a square foot, up to, we're building hotels now and going into 2020 that are pushing almost $400 a square foot for the exact same product. And I just believe that we need to, in fact, let's jump forward. I think that we need to do this now. I think the cost of waiting is significant. I don't think we'll ever be in an environment where we will have such low financing costs and such high inflation ever again in our lives. And the cost of waiting is significant. I ran through just some numbers. The cost of homeowners to wait, if we wait 5 years and say we're going to build the exact same facility in 5 years, based on just current trends in inflation, and if our financing costs return back to where normal is, the cost of building this goes up 1.7 times is really what the cost is. And I just encourage us to do something now. And I feel like not voting or choosing to wait is actually choosing for higher taxes down the road. And that's why I'm a big proponent of doing this now. I think I'm just about done. The last thing I want to say is just, I think we have the right leadership in place. I've spent a lot of time with the district. I've spent a ton of time with the administrators. I've asked a ton of really probing questions saying, hey, is this the right decision? And I've been incredibly impressed with the thoughtfulness that they put into making this decision, selecting the location, the design, the size, land swapping, everything. And I just appreciate what they've done bringing this to the community. So thank you.
It was perfectly 10 minutes.
Okay, I'm glad you put a timer here.
Thank you, Brad. So really appreciate that, Brad. Chris, we're going to turn the time over to you for 10 more minutes.
All right, my slides aren't as pretty. Maybe I'll first say that I do not want to be sitting up here. I literally told Scott no, I think 5 times before I finally said yes. And the only reason I said yes is when he told me that Brad was going to be the person I'd be discussing this with. And I know that Brad's a good person, and I know that he has reasonable opinions, and I thought we could have a good conversation. I think myself, like a lot of you, I care a whole lot more about this community than I care about the outcome of this election. I think that, to me, it matters most that we love our neighbors and that we have a strong community. And so, with that preface, let me say why I think you might want to consider voting no on school bond. So, Brad, if you want to change the slides. So the first thing I'll say is that I don't think this is voting yes and voting no is not a choice between supporting or not supporting our students. They're just about a different vision for how we construct schools. So if you want to go to the next slide, mine are really short, Brad. So I see the school bond as a choice between larger schools and smaller schools. The school board has stated that their preference is for smaller schools. And I think as Brad laid out, I think that's a valid perspective. In telling that story, though, they've also said that larger schools are not feasible here. And what I'm hoping to do tonight is to lay out very clearly how they can be. And then we can talk a little bit about the differences between the two. If you want to go to the next slide, or a couple of them ahead. So one more, Brad. So here we have an aerial shot of our campus. Those not familiar, we have a main campus there on the top of the slide, and then the west campus at the bottom. This is what used to be the old intermediate school. This is where you attended high school, right?
Middle school.
Middle school, okay. So, so that's the campus today. So next slide, Brad. The west campus is not being fully utilized today. There are a lot of students over there, but it is not being fully utilized. If you just skip ahead a slide. For example, this is the West Campus cafeteria at lunchtime. It's totally empty. The West Campus cafeteria is not being used at lunch nor at any other time during the school day. Go ahead, Brad. I think that we should reopen the West Campus as a fully self-contained school like it has been for decades. Just skip to the next slide, Brad. If we, so for example, we could open that school as a freshman school. And Brad, if you go to the next slide. So if we were to do this, the capacity of West Campus is about 1,000 students. If you put our freshmen over there, that'd be 635 students in the school. The main campus would then be brought back within its normal limits. 1,800 students is the capacity to have just over 1,700. So simply by reconfiguring, we can support about 2,800 students. The current enrollment is 2,350. So now if we skip ahead, with the main campus back into its normal bounds, we can now talk about expanding main campus to support future growth. So you go to the next slide. Fortunately, we have an example of exactly how this can be done. So Corner Canyon High School, which is in Draper, is the same design as Wasatch High School, and they completed their expansion just last year in 2018. Their expansion cost $9.6 million and supported 800 additional students. So if we jump ahead. So if you bring those two things together, reconfiguration plus expansion, you now have West Campus at 1,000 capacity and main campus at a capacity of 2,600 students. That gives us a total capacity of 3,600 students at a cost of less than $10 million. So if we now compare this, we're going to skip 2 slides ahead. If we compare this to the school bond proposal. So the school bond proposal is to build a new high school with a capacity of 1,800 students just off of Midway Lane. We'll obviously keep the existing high school that has a capacity of 1,800 students. So by building a new school, we can support 3,600 students at a total cost of $120 million. So just to put this in full relief, if you go to the next slide. If we go the larger school option, we can support 3,600 students at a cost of less than $10 million. If we go the smaller school option, we can support 3,600 students at a cost of $120 million. So go to the next slide. So this is why I say I think the real decision here is whether we want larger schools or smaller schools. And I think this is where it comes down to a lot of personal preference. I'll just tell you about myself. I went to a school that had over 3,000 students. I think it turned out okay. And I will say that the school that I went to was nothing like Wasatch High School. Wasatch High School, if you're not familiar, has 3 full-size gymnasiums. My school had 1. If you include the West Campus, Wasatch High School campus has 6 full-size basketball courts. Well, 5, and then 1 that's the size of a basketball court. It's a fantastic facility, very capable of supporting a large student body. So let's talk about big schools a little bit. I'm going to jump ahead 2 slides. So yeah, so big schools, not bad schools. So the first thing here, this is looking at enrollment at Wasatch High School. That's the yellow line. And the black line is academic achievement. As you can see here, as our school has grown, our academics have not decreased. In fact, they've improved. I want to be very clear. I am not saying the larger schools drive better outcomes. I'm simply saying that we've not suffered as a result of larger schools. Our academic achievement has improved over that time. Go to the next slide. If you look at the 3 top public high schools in Utah as ranked by US News and World Report, Davis High is number 1 at an enrollment of 2,600 students across just 3 grades. Corner Canyon High School, the one I just mentioned that's like our high school, has 2,300 students across 4 grades. And then Viewmont, 1,500 across 3. If you extrapolate that to 4, that'd be 2,000. All 3 of these high schools are bigger than what we're establishing as our model here in Wasatch County. And I'll just point out, if we were to do the large school model that I'm proposing, once we were at full capacity, we would be much like Davis High. We'd have 2,600 students across 3 grades in 1 building. But I think we have one really huge advantage, and that is that our freshmen will be close enough to the high school that if they need to take an AP class, they can just walk across the campus and they can do so. All right, next slide. So large schools have lots of benefits. We just saw some of the best schools in our state are really big. The large school option saves us $110 million. Large schools can still have small class sizes. I went to very normal size classes in my high school. Large schools can more economically offer more AP opportunities and CTE opportunities. And finally, large schools are cheaper per student to operate. Next slide. All right, so that's high school. Midway Elementary, I will say this is a much more nuanced conversation. As Brett already pointed out, Midway is already very full. I'm gonna go to the next slide. The only thing I'll say here, I think the mayor's put out a good letter talking about some of the issues that have been raised. They talked about the ability to remedy the sewer situation with a larger sewer line. They also talked about the kitchen being able to be improved for $1 million. The only thing, you can read the letter, it's on social media. The only thing I would add is a conversation about growth. So if you want to go to the next slide. Since this is a school meeting, we're going to do a little multiple choice test here. Last year, we added 277 primary residents to the valley. how much did our total elementary school population grow by? 352, 201, 84, 26. We're out of time, so you can go ahead. The answer is none of the above. So you go to the next slide. Our elementary schools actually decreased in size, both cumulatively and individually. If you look at Old Mill, they went down by 1, Daniels Canyon down by 5, Beaver Valley down by 2, Midway Elementary down by 18, and J.R. Smith was flat. So the total elementary school population decreased by 26. This was provided by the school district, these numbers. All right, next slide. So growth patterns in Wasatch County are changing. We are growing. You can see we grew about by 400 homes. In context, they're saying 10,000 over the next 10 years. That means we'd have to double our growth rate to hit that, just to be clear. More than double our growth rate. In any case, about 400 new homes, a third of those are vacation. That amount of growth only resulted in 9 net new students across our elementary and junior highs. So if you're doing the math in your heads, that's 35 new students at the junior highs in total, being offset by 25 decreased at our elementaries. To me, this says that Wasatch County is becoming unaffordable for young families. Fewer young families today means fewer high school students in the future. Let me just say one thing to wrap up. So Scott mentioned that I did education reform for a little over a year at the start of my career. We worked with some of the best institutions in the country. We worked with the Gates Foundation, among many others who are really striving to improve educational outcomes. In all that time, I read a lot of research about education. And over and over again, the answer was the same about what matters for our students. It's families and it's teachers. Never once did we talk about atriums or basketball courts. We always were talking about how can we get better teachers? How can we get better principals who are inspiring academic achievement? And so I think right now we have a choice between 2 good options, one that is very expensive and one that's not. Both that are going to have world-class facilities. I think we have an obligation to vote for things that actually drive outcomes. And that's all I'm saying.
Thank you, Chris. So we have, can you guys hear me? Sort of, this microphone's, I know live streaming, they're not going to be able to hear me. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Gotta eat it? All right. Not in the habit of eating microphones, so bear with me. Okay, so the first question that came out, this is actually 2 questions that have come in that are very similar. So I'm going to combine these 2. And it's the topic is Midway Elementary. And the questions are, the building is between 21 and 44 years old. The first part was built in 75, and the addition was just built in 1997. So the question is, why tear down Midway Elementary instead of remodeling it, and if needed, expand it or build a second moderately sized elementary school in parallel with the funds?
So as I said, I think the Midway Elementary School conversation is a lot more nuanced. I think what we're seeing 2 things though, or at least one thing, is that the urgency that has been presented is not as much as it was. Like I said, the population actually decreased at the school this year. I think we have time to think about the right thing to do there. Right now, the 2 options have been tied, the 2 things have been tied together, the high school and the middle school. I don't think because we don't have the urgency on the elementary school, I think we can still vote no safely and consider that next year. So that's what I would say. I think that there needs to be something done there for sure, though.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't think, the more time that I've spent a lot of time at Midway Elementary, and I've seen what that facility is, and I just got done touring Daniels Canyon, which is the new proposed Midway Elementary, and I gotta say, it's a phenomenal facility. It's one of the best elementary school designs that both from when we lived in California and since we've been back. And so I'm a big proponent of what is being proposed. I've spent a lot of time talking to Mr. Thorne, the principal, about, hey, what happens if this doesn't happen? What happens if we don't expand? And the reality is he's at capacity. I've seen the impact to my kids of having such a large class sizes and very, very full schools, and seeing what needs my kids have, as someone who has a few challenges with one of their students, and the opportunities to help those people that are struggling, really, there's no space for it. So I think the growth has to happen. I think the proposal that's on the board right now and how they manage the land swap with the church brings that land almost for free. I think it's $800,000 relative to what it should be in excess of $4 million. So I really like for a long-term proposition. I think delaying this just costs us more money. And I think that at the end of the day, if we look at 5-10 years, we are absolutely going to be building a new facility in Midway. And I think we owe it to our residents to do it now.
All right, thank you. Let's go to our next question. This is on location. So there was a couple questions on location. The first question was about traffic studies and environmental impact, and if you have any information about if either of those two things have done at the new high school site. And along with the environmental impact, there's some discussion at a previous meeting with the school board that there would be a need to raise the entire school by 2 feet because of the floodplain, and that they're concerned about the cost of that. So is there anything you can address about the location and the cost of building in this location?
Sure. I think the decision on the location is the right decision. I think the decision of potentially looking at the land north of 40 that has been talked about, I don't think that's where the current population is. I think bringing it to where the proposed site is, I think it's a safer site. There's been discussion about it being in a floodplain. Everything that I've read, including for the engineering studies on this, state that in the whatever 0.001% chance that Jordanelle actually the dam burst, right? The likelihood of the water actually reaching the school, is like I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it's virtually no risk. And so I don't see that as a real issue. I personally, being a Midway resident, love the location. I prefer this location significantly over putting it north of Heber. And I'm very concerned about the traffic impacts and sending my 16-year-old driving to school and saying, hey, I want you to go drive on River Road or on Highway 40 to go out and not get in an accident going to school every day. So I prefer this location significantly.
Chris?
So I think there's been a lot of things about the location that I think don't matter, and I think Brad kind of pointed that out. I think that they're have been debunked in terms of the floodplain and those things. I do think there are some things that we should consider though. So first of all, if we were to expand the current high school, there's still a chance that we're going to build a new high school in the future. It'll happen at exactly the same time under the small school thing, right? The 3,600 is the same on both scenarios, right? I think what time will give us though is that if that third high school in his case or second high school in my case happens, say 8 years from now, we're going to know a lot more about this valley at that point. We're going to know a lot more about where growth is actually going to happen. Obviously, we know it's happening right now in Red Ledges. We know there's some growth happening here. There's a bunch of planned growth happening north of Heber, right? I think 8 years from now, we'll know a lot more about that. And I think we can make a better decision about how to centrally locate our high schools at that point. And again, at that point, in either scenario, we're building a new high school, right? So if construction costs go up, they're up for both of us, right? And so, so at that point, I think we'll have more information. The other thing I would say, and this is like totally a personal perspective on the location, I hate the idea of setting up a high school that is a Midway high school and a Heber high school. I think it just sets our valley up to be divided. When we get to building that second or third high school, I would much rather it be in a more neutral location where we can see a mix of students going to both high schools. And so again, I think that's totally personal. I think the biggest argument is that 8 years from now, we're gonna know a lot more about the best place to centrally locate schools.
So the next question I have is actually on that topic. It's about a 10-year plan. And there's a couple questions I have here. People have asked about, why are we not looking out 10 years and saying, what do we need for the next 10 years? Somebody mentioned that there's 10,000 homes slated to be developed over the next 10 years in the district, and 8,700 of them are north of Heber. So the question is, why build on what will be effectively the south side of the city? And along with that, there's a component to the bond that it says that if there is money left over, we want to acquire land to build more schools, which implies more bonds. And would they possibly be up in that northern area where the growth would be?
Or do you want to go? Okay.
Yeah, just a couple of comments on that. I do think building a new high school now does give us a much longer runway than the expansion model. And the reason that I say that is the West Campus right now isn't going away, right? I think under what you put together, the assumption is two schools are equivalent. The reality is there's potentially 600 to 1,000 students that can continue to stay in that West Campus. And so I don't think part of this proposition is West Campus goes away and we just go build a new school. So I don't think we're really talking apples to apples. I think we're the capacity discussion really gets us much longer runway to get out to 10 years versus a let's do a moderate expansion today. I think we're really talking about an 800 student expansion versus an 1,800 student expansion that, by the way, can grow and flex significantly more than where we're at today. So, but getting to the question of north of Heber, I think when that growth happens, I think we're going to need another facility. And I think that's the time to build north of Heber. I think where we're at today is the right location. And I do think, I've asked this discussion, I think when these schools open, it will be an open enrollment opportunity. I don't think it's going to be a midway goes to this school. And I think that the model that I've heard is different than a pure boundary. This is going to be midway school. And that's my perspective on it.
So I feel like I've answered mostly this question already. I think one thing I will say is I do actually think the school board is looking ahead. I mean, I've spent a lot of time talking to Tom Hansen from the school board. They've looked at this thing really carefully. I don't think it's fair to say that they're not looking ahead. But I think the only thing I would add to what you said, I already mentioned this, is that I think the 10,000 home thing is a little suspect in light of last year, it only grew 400, right? Are we going to keep growing? Absolutely, right? But I think the 10,000 home number just doesn't add up in my head. Like I said, we'd have to increase our growth rate by more than 2x to hit that. So that's all I have to say.
So the next question is regarding costs. So I have a couple notes here on the burden on those with lower household incomes. Somebody had been told, if you can't afford it, maybe you should consider moving. So if you can't afford the tax increase, what's to be done? These are real dollars for real people. And the second comment is along the lines of, can't we do more with what we have rather than going further in debt and spending money we don't have, whether that be year-round school schedules, reallocating resources, splitting schedules, et cetera.
So I think the costs matter. I think the one thing I would say here is that we're already seeing that our valley is becoming unaffordable for elementary school students or for families with young kids. I'll tell you, that shocked me when I received those numbers back from the school district. I think that's really sad. I have 4 young kids and they're always complaining that there's no young kids around them, right? I think the other thing I'll say about the costs is that we're always presented with these things incrementally. So when we look at the school bond and how much it's going to cost us, we're told it's going to cost us, on the average home, I think it's $300, or I don't remember the exact number. So like you do the math, you're like, oh, that's just I think as you said, it's eating out twice a month for a family. But what we're not seeing is that, again, this is incremental. The school district also just did a 23% tax increase. That's about the same amount. They did a tax increase last year. That's about the same amount. They did a tax increase the year before that. That's about the same amount. We start to add these things up, and that's how we get into a situation where it's really expensive to live here. Now, to be very clear, property taxes are not the biggest driver of why people can't afford to live here. People can't afford to live here because real estate is really expensive, right? But property taxes contribute to that. And I think that we have to get out of thinking of them as step changes and start to look at the bigger picture. And when we have the opportunity to choose between two options that are going to provide a phenomenal education to our students, I think we should choose the one that's cheaper. Even if you can personally afford it, I think we need to be thinking about those that can't. So.
Yeah, so my perspective on cost is, I think what's being proposed, I mean, I was amazed, I was talking to the bond council on the interest rate that they're projecting on this bond and talking something in the low 2%. And I look at this and I go, that is incredible. That is an incredible interest rate to be able to lock in pricing today. And for us as homeowners to pay an incremental, I think the average for the average home is about $20 a month. And I think that's about the cost of eating out.
What price home is that?
So I think
500 or so. Right?
Yeah, I think that's a $20 a month. It's, well, based on where it's really going to issue at, I think it's going to be under $20 a month. But at $20 a month, that probably is for a $650,000 home. The impact's probably $20 a month. Now, let me just give you a little perspective. When I lived in California, we weren't given the option to do a bond. We moved into a community and they said, hey, there's a Melrose bond that's being placed on this. And you, if you choose to live in this community, your share of the Melrose bond is $200 a month, right? And that's the actual cost on the new homeowners who move in to build these facilities. And that's what I lived with when I lived in California. And to be honest, as a developer in California, most developments I'm doing, I'm having to actually fund the cost of these schools or partner a significant share to be able to do these things. Like I wish we had that option. But the option that we have before us is if we choose to build this, it's spread among everyone. And the question is on a fixed income. Fixed income can be tough, right? If you're in a scenario that you're like, hey, I don't need out and I don't stop for my Diet Coke every day at 7-Eleven or whatever, it's a tough thing,
yeah,
right? To make those sacrifices to build new facilities.
So we're running low on time and we have more questions. The last question here, we may be able to go over a few minutes. The last question I have here is related to this, and it's about debt. And the question is, I've heard that this bond will leave us with the highest school debt per capita in the entire state of Utah. Is this true? That is a two-part question, so that was the first part. Go ahead. You can answer quickly.
As far as the numbers I've seen from the state auditor's office, yes, that's true.
Yeah, the debt per capita, look, we're the fastest growing county. Like when we do this, we have to build facilities for the people that are moving in. And does that result in a high debt per capita? Yes. Do those dollars end up, if I look at our spending, we are right, if I look at all the school districts across the state, we are right at the middle of the road as spending per capita, how much we spend to educate our students. And when I look at how much that actually goes into the classroom and how much actually goes to educating our students, we're number 2 in the state. So do I think that we're overspending? Absolutely not. I think the reality is we're spending because we are facing the fastest growth in the state.
I think the only other thing I'd say on that is, again, facilities don't drive educational outcomes. I think some of the best and worst schools in the country are charter schools. They are some of the best and also some of the worst. Charter schools spend between 1/3 and 1/5 of the amount that we spend on public schools for their facilities. And they still have lines to get into them, right? And so I think what that's showing is parents, when it really comes down to it, when they have a choice, they're not valuing the building. They're valuing the quality of the teachers and the administrators that are there. And so I think that's something also to consider. There is actually a cheaper way to build schools that can have just as good outcomes. So.
If I just comment, I have a lot of friends who live in scenarios where they don't have good public education options. And they're spending, upwards of $90,000 a year to send their children to private schools. And I never, ever want to be faced with that option that I don't feel like I could send my kids to Wasatch School District and get a great education. And I don't want that to be something that I have to look at. I'd rather pay my incremental share and make sure we have phenomenal facilities and the best educators that we can to educate our students.
Can I get a round of applause for these? Those are two brave dads who love their kids and love this community, and we really appreciate them being willing to step up and do this. So it's a great service. So thank you both very much.